Welcome all to the Nightman's Horror Theatre. Kick back, relax, and fall asleep to the tales from the Nightman's Book of Horrors. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Whispers in Pine Hollow. The forest road narrowed to a strip of cracked asphalt as the late summer sun slanted low through the trees. Anna kept her hands tight on the wheel, the dirt shoulder crumbling away on either side. The rental SUV hummed beneath her, its AC doing little to fight the creeping humidity that seeped in through every scene. "Tell me again," Logan said from the passenger seat, "why this place is so perfect." "Because from here, it looks like we're about to be murdered." Anna smirked. "It's remote. No cell service. No crowds. Just us, nature, and the lake." She nodded toward the GPS on her phone, though the signal had dropped 10 miles back. "Besides, my dad camped here back in the 80s. Said it was the most peaceful spot he'd ever found." Logan peered out the window. Peaceful like bear peaceful, or peaceful like serial killer peaceful? From the back seat, Claire groaned. "God, can you both stop? We've been in the car for 6 hours. I just want to set up the tent, crack a beer, and not listen to Logan's conspiracy theories." "Hey, they're not theories," Logan said, holding up a finger. "They're warnings." Anna tuned them out. The road dipped sharply, the trees parting just enough to reveal a flash of shimmering water ahead. Her chest tightened with anticipation. Pine Hollow Lake, untouched, unspoiled, and according to local forums, nearly forgotten. It was exactly what she needed after the hellish summer she'd had. They rolled into a gravel clearing that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The fire ring was half collapsed, and weeds pushed through the picnic table's warped boards. The air smelled of damp earth and pine sap. "This is it," Anna said, cutting the engine. They climbed out, stretching stiff limbs. Somewhere in the trees, a bird let out a low, warbling call that didn't sound quite right, too long, too hollow. Claire froze, her beer already halfway to her lips. "What was that?" she asked. Anna shrugged. "Probably just a loon. They're all over lakes like this." Logan squinted into the tree line. "Sounded bigger." They spent the next hour pitching the tent on the flattest ground they could find, swatting at mosquitoes and swearing under their breath. The sun sank lower, bathing the lake in a bloody orange glow. That's when Anna noticed something strange. Across the water, just beyond the far bank, a shape stood among the trees. It was too far to make out clearly. Could have been a stump, could have been a person. But it didn't move. Even when the breeze rippled through the pines, the shape stayed rigid, like it was watching. Anna blinked, trying to focus on the shape across the lake. Her eyes kept slipping, unable to find a clear outline in the dusk. She told herself it was just a trick of the light, maybe a tree stump with weird shadows. But still. "Hey," Claire called from the fire pit, "you bringing the sleeping bags or just staring into the abyss?" Anna forced a laugh, tore her gaze away, and hauled the gear over. The fire crackled to life, and soon the air was thick with the scent of burning pine and sizzling sausages. Logan passed around cans of beer, and for a while the unease melted into the easy rhythm of clinking aluminum and bad jokes. By midnight, they drained most of the six-pack. The fire burned low, and the forest pressed in around them, a dark wall that swallowed their voices. Somewhere far off, a loon wailed its lonely cry. Anna stood to toss another log on the fire, and froze. Across the lake, in the exact same spot as before, the shape still stood. Only now it was closer to the water. She opened her mouth to say something but hesitated. The alcohol had blurred the edges of her thoughts. If she mentioned it, Logan would probably leap at the chance to tell ghost stories, and Claire would just call her paranoid. So she said nothing. When they finally crawled into the tent, the air inside was damp and stuffy. Logan snored almost instantly. Claire scrolled through old photos on her phone, even though there was no signal to upload them. Anna lay on her back, staring at the nylon ceiling. She told herself she'd drift off soon, but then came the sound. A faint splash, like something wading through shallow water. She held her breath. Another splash, closer this time. Then silence. Anna strained to listen, every muscle rigid. The forest seemed to be holding its breath with her. And then, faint but distinct, came the soft sound of wet feet on gravel. Right outside the tent. When she woke, the tent was filled with pale morning light. Logan was still snoring, and Claire had rolled into a cocoon of blankets. Anna sat up quickly, half expecting to see footprints outside. She unzipped the tent and stepped into the clearing. The ground was wet with dew, but she found nothing unusual, no prints, no signs anyone had been there. She told herself it was an animal. Probably a deer. By the time everyone was up, the strange sound from the night before had faded into the background noise of memory. They cooked breakfast, hiked along the lake shore, and tried to ignore the heavy, humid air that seemed to cling to the hollow. It wasn't until they returned to camp that Anna's unease returned. On the far bank of the lake, the shape was there again. It wasn't a tree stump. She knew that now. It was tall, human-shaped, and its outline seemed wrong, as though parts of it shifted, blurred, and twitched when she tried to focus. This time, Logan saw her staring. "What is it?" he asked, shading his eyes. Anna hesitated. "I think someone's over there." Logan squinted. "Looks like nothing." But as soon as he looked away, she could have sworn the thing tilted its head toward her. That night, Anna insisted on keeping the fire going as late as possible. The air was thicker now, the forest silent except for the occasional splash from the lake. Claire teased her for being jumpy, but even she glanced nervously toward the far bank when she thought no one was looking. By 2 in the morning, Logan stumbled off to relieve himself behind a tree. The fire had burned down to glowing coals. Anna was about to poke the embers when she heard Logan's voice, sharp, startled. Guys?" She jumped up. "What?" He came back into the firelight, pale. "I think I saw someone standing in the trees." Claire groaned. "Oh, come on." "I'm serious," Logan said. "Tall. Just standing there. Watching me." Anna felt the hair rise on the back of her neck. "Across the lake." Logan shook his head. "No. This side." The three of them stood in the flickering firelight, scanning the black wall of trees. "Maybe it was an animal," Claire offered, but her voice lacked conviction. Logan shook his head. "Animals don't stand still like that." Anna grabbed a flashlight and swept the beam into the woods. Dust motes and drifting pollen glimmered in the light. The nearest pines looked perfectly normal, their trunks rough and gray. She took a few steps toward the spot Logan had pointed out. "Anna, don't," Claire hissed. But she didn't stop until she was close enough to see the trunk of a tree, carved. Long, vertical slashes gouged deep into the bark, 5 of them in a perfect fan shape, like claw marks, but too even, too deliberate. She backed away slowly. When she returned to the fire, Logan looked at her expectantly. "Well, nothing," she lied. They turned in not long after. But Anna barely slept. She kept hearing faint snapping sounds, twigs breaking just beyond the fire's dying glow. The morning felt off from the start. Mist curled low over the lake, refusing to burn away even as the sun climbed higher. The air carried a smell, faintly metallic, almost like blood. They decided to fish, hoping distraction would ease the tension. The lake was still, its glassy surface broken only by the bobbing of their lines. After an hour, Logan muttered, "Something's moving under there." Anna frowned. "Fish." He shook his head. "Bigger. I saw the shadow. Twice." Claire laughed, but it was strained. "Maybe it's the Pine Hollow Lake monster." By afternoon, they were restless. They hiked deeper into the woods, found an old deer stand rotting against a tree, and stumbled on what looked like a collapsed cabin, just a pile of moss-covered beams. Inside, half buried in leaves, was a rusted coffee tin. Anna kicked it open. Inside were scraps of paper, some so damp they crumbled. Others still held legible writing in a faded scrawl. "It's watching again. Don't go near the water at night. It knows when you see it." They didn't speak much on the hike back. That night, Anna woke to the sound of Logan unzipping the tent. She sat up. "Where are you going?" "Just got to take a leak," he mumbled, already slipping outside. She waited. The forest was silent except for the faint lapping of water on the shore. A minute passed. Then another. "Logan," she called softly. No answer. She shook Claire awake. "Something's wrong. He's not back." They grabbed the flashlight and stepped out into the cool night. The beam cut across their fire pit, now cold ash, and over to the lake's edge. There, in the mud, were footprints. Logan's boots. They led into the water and kept going. They shouted his name until their voices cracked, but the lake gave nothing back. By sunrise, they were exhausted, shivering on the shore. Anna's mind kept flashing to the rusted coffee tin's warning, "Don't go near the water at night." Claire wanted to leave. Anna argued they couldn't, not without Logan. They decided to search the far bank, the place Anna had first seen the shape. The hike around the lake took hours. The opposite shore was denser, the trees older and thicker. As they pushed through undergrowth, the ground grew marshy, sucking at their boots. Then Anna saw it. A clearing, almost perfectly round, where nothing grew. In the center stood a single wooden post, splintered and gray. Around its base were dozens of stones stacked in odd, balanced piles. On the post was something nailed in place. Logan's baseball cap. Fresh wetness dripped from the brim. They ran without thinking, crashing through the woods until they stumbled back to camp. Anna's breath came ragged, her legs felt like water. Claire was sobbing, stuffing her gear into her backpack. "We're leaving." "I don't care." But the SUV keys were gone. They tore apart the tent, the coolers, their packs, nothing. Anna looked toward the lake. The water was so still now it could have been glass. And in the center, half submerged, was Logan. At least, it looked like Logan. His body floated upright, face tilted toward them. But something about the proportions was wrong, his arms too long, his spine too curved. And when the head tilted slightly, water spilling from his mouth, Anna saw the eyes. They weren't his. The first thunder rolled in from the west as they backed away from the shore. Claire's hands shook so violently her nails scraped Anna's arm. "That's not him. That's not." "Don't look at it," Anna hissed, pulling her toward the tent. The wind began to churn, stirring the lake into small, choppy waves. The Logan thing didn't drift, it remained upright, as if anchored to the lake bed. Its head twitched in small, unnatural jerks, like a puppet whose strings were pulled by something impatient. The sky split open with lightning. In that flash, Anna thought she saw others beneath the surface, pale shapes suspended in the depths, their faces tipped upward. By the time they zipped the tent shut, the rain came in sheets. The forest moaned in the wind, branches snapping somewhere close. The pounding of rain on nylon was deafening, but between the thunderclaps came something worse. A voice. Low, guttural, and wet. It was speaking from the lake, syllables warped and broken, but almost human. Anna clapped her hands over her ears, but it seeped through. At some point in the black hours before dawn, Anna woke to find the tent door half open. Claire was gone. Anna grabbed the flashlight and stumbled outside, rain still falling in a steady drizzle. Claire's footprints were clear in the mud, leading to the same place Logan's had, straight to the water. Anna followed, heart hammering. Claire was waist deep in the lake, staring out at something invisible in the mist. Claire! Anna's voice cracked. Come back. Claire didn't even flinch. Her lips were moving, whispering something too soft to catch. The lake rippled around her as though something moved beneath the surface. Anna splashed in after her, grabbing her arm. Claire turned slowly, her eyes wide, her pupils blown so large they were almost black. It knows you too now, she said, her voice not entirely her own. Then something yanked her under. The lake swallowed her without a ripple. Anna stood frozen in the water, cold slicing through her skin, until she realized she was being pulled as well, a slow, insistent tug at her boots. She tore herself free and staggered back to shore, coughing, heart hammering. The forest pressed in like a closing fist. There was no plan anymore. No way out. No keys. Just her. The thought of waiting until daylight felt impossible, so she ran. Not toward the road, but deeper into the woods, anywhere away from the lake. Rain slicked her hair to her face, and every branch that snapped behind her made her legs pump harder. Then, between the trunks ahead, she saw it. The collapsed cabin they'd found days earlier. She stumbled inside, slamming her shoulder against the sagging doorway. The air smelled of rotten mildew. In the corner, something shifted. Anna froze, raising the flashlight. At first she thought it was a pile of wet clothing. Then it moved, unfurling too many limbs. Pale, glistening skin stretched over its long frame, head lolling unnaturally as if its neck were broken in several places. Its face was almost human. Almost. The mouth opened, and the voice that came out was both Logan's and Claire's at once. It's hungry. Anna backed toward the door, but the thing surged forward with impossible speed, joints bending wrong. She dove outside, landing hard in the mud, and scrambled to her feet. Lightning illuminated the clearing, and for the first time she saw them all. Dozens. Shapes emerging from between the pines, all wet, all wrong. Some with faces she almost recognized from photos in that rusted tin. Others faceless entirely. They didn't run. They didn't need to. The lake was behind her. The forest ahead was full of them. The rain became a roar. The ground sloped down without her realizing, until her boots splashed into shallow water. The lake waited, black and endless. The surface swelled as though breathing. The pale shapes beneath shifted upward. Something cold wrapped around her ankle. She kicked, but it tightened, dragging her in. The cold rushed up her legs, through her chest, into her lungs. She tried to scream, but water poured in. The last thing she saw before she went under was the far bank, where the shape had always stood, now empty. Because it was here. A week later, a pair of hikers passing Pine Hollow reported finding a deserted campsite. A tent, a cold fire ring, and a picnic table walked with age. They didn't see the footprints in the mud. And when one of them glanced across the lake, they thought they saw someone standing there, just at the edge of the trees. Tall. Still. Watching. The hollow trail. The gravel parking lot looked like it had been carved out of the mountain decades ago and forgotten. Moss crept over the cracked asphalt, and weeds sprouted from the seams between gravel and dirt. Ethan cut the engine and let the silence settle. Even with the windows rolled up, Lauren could hear the distant rustle of leaves in the tree line. "Remote enough for you?" Ethan asked with a grin. Lauren leaned forward in her seat, peering through the windshield at the old trail sign. The carved letters read Hollow Trail, Loop, 16 miles, though the paint was faded to near white. Someone had scratched a crude X into the wood just beneath the words. "Remote's one word for it," she said. From the back seat, Mason groaned and stretched. "Another is sketchy as hell. There's no ranger station, no bathroom, no anything." "That's the point," Ethan replied, stepping out and slamming the door. "We get to be out here without a single other person for miles." Lauren followed him out, the damp mountain air filling her lungs. It smelled faintly of wet leaves and something metallic she couldn't place. They unloaded their gear, packs, tent, cooking supplies, and locked the car. Mason muttered under his breath as he slung his bag over his shoulder. Ethan led them to the trailhead, where a laminated map was stapled to a weather-worn board. Lauren traced their route with her finger. "We hike 6 miles into the old fire tower, camp there tonight, then finish the loop tomorrow." "That's the plan," Ethan said, adjusting his pack straps. From somewhere deep in the trees, a woodpecker began its rhythmic tapping. It was the only sound as they stepped onto the trail. The first 2 miles were deceptively easy, a slow incline beneath a canopy of oak and beech, the forest floor littered with golden leaves despite it still being early autumn. Mason was the first to break the comfortable silence. "So this tower, is it safe? Like, not about to collapse under us?" Ethan shrugged. "It's been abandoned since the 90s, but people still hike up to it. It's a bit rusted, but we'll be fine." Lauren wasn't so sure. She'd looked up the trail online the night before, and while there were plenty of beautiful photos of the view from the tower, there were also a few vague warnings buried in old forum threads. "Don't stay after dark. Don't listen if they call your name." She'd almost brought it up, but decided against it. They passed a stretch where the forest grew denser, the sunlight filtering through in narrow beams. A squirrel chattered overhead, and something moved in the undergrowth to their right, quick and heavy. Ethan stopped. "Deer." The movement stopped too. "Yeah, deer," Mason said, though his tone lacked conviction. They kept walking. Around the 4th mile, they saw him. A man stood just off the trail, tall and wiry, with a grey stubble jaw and sunken eyes. He wore a tattered red flannel shirt and mud-caked boots, and an old canvas rucksack hung from his shoulder. He didn't move as they approached. Didn't speak. Just watched. "Hey," Ethan called, raising a hand in greeting. The man's eyes flicked over each of them, lingering a moment longer on Lauren. Then he smiled, a strange, slow stretch of lips that didn't touch his eyes. "You kids camping?" His voice was rough, as though unused for days. Ethan nodded. "Up at the old fire tower." The man tilted his head. "You be careful up there." Something in his tone made Lauren's skin prickle. "Why?" she asked before she could stop herself. The man's smile widened just slightly. "Not everything up here sleeps at night." Before any of them could respond, he turned and walked into the trees, vanishing with unnatural quiet. The air grew cooler as the trail climbed higher. The forest seemed to press in on them, and the cheerful birdsong from earlier had faded into silence. Lauren noticed things now she hadn't before: deep scratches gouged into a tree trunk, spaced too far apart to be from any animal she knew, a pile of small stones stacked in a neat, unnatural column beside the path, a single leather boot half buried in the leaves. "Maybe we should," she began, but trailed off when she saw Ethan looking ahead, jaw tight. "What?" Mason asked. Ethan pointed. Up ahead, where the trail curved sharply, a figure stood. Too far away to make out clearly, but motionless. Watching. Lauren blinked, and it was gone. They reached the clearing just as the sun dipped low, bathing the hilltop in deep orange light. The fire tower rose from the center like the skeleton of some ancient beast, steel frame rusted, wooden steps warped and splintered. They set up camp inside the tree line, close enough to see the tower but far enough to avoid being completely exposed. Mason was the first to climb it, calling down that the view was worth the hike. Ethan followed, and finally, reluctantly, Lauren. From the top, the landscape stretched in all directions: rolling forest, distant ridgelines, and the faint silver ribbon of a river. Lauren turned toward the trail they'd come from. Far below, just where the path curved out of sight, a figure stood watching the tower. And this time, it didn't vanish when she blinked. They built a small fire in a ring of stones left by hikers before them. The flames threw shifting shadows against the tree trunks, and the smell of burning pine filled the air. Mason cracked open a beer from his pack. "To no tourists," he said, raising it in a mock toast. Lauren smiled weakly, but her eyes kept drifting toward the trail. The figure was gone now, but that somehow made her more uneasy. At one point, she thought she heard footsteps out beyond the firelight. Not random animal scurrying, but a slow, deliberate pace that stopped whenever she strained to listen. Ethan must have heard something too. She noticed him keeping his multi-tool open in his lap. The three of them talked less as the night wore on, each glance into the blackwoods lasting a little too long. Around midnight, Lauren woke to the sound of low voices. For a moment, she thought Ethan and Mason were still up talking by the fire, but when she unzipped the tent, the camp was empty. The voices were coming from the fire tower. She stepped out into the cold night air, heart pounding. The voices were soft but urgent, like two people arguing under their breath. Halfway to the tower, the voices stopped. A faint shadow shifted in the top cabin, taller than Ethan or Mason, and oddly thin. It bent at the waist, folding unnaturally in half, then slipped down the stairs with no sound at all. Lauren stumbled back toward the tent and didn't close her eyes again until dawn. Morning came grey and damp, a mist curling low over the clearing. Mason was gone. His boots sat neatly beside his pack, his sleeping bag still unrolled. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints in the soft earth beyond their camp. Ethan's voice was tight. He wouldn't just walk off without his boots. Lauren nodded, her stomach twisting. "We have to look for him." They decided to head back down the trail, figuring he might have tried to hike out. But within an hour, Lauren realized something was wrong. The path didn't look the same. The bend in the ridge came too soon. The stream crossing was missing entirely. "This isn't the same trail," she said quietly. Ethan looked around slowly. "It's the only one there is." They walked until the forest began to slope downward. The trees here were older, their trunks black and split as if struck by lightning. At the bottom of the slope was a clearing. A perfect circle where nothing grew. The soil was dark and bare, like ash. In the center stood the man they'd met on the trail. But they weren't alone. Shapes moved just beyond the tree line, circling the clearing. They were tall, too tall, with arms that bent wrong. Their faces were pale blanks, featureless except for vertical slits where mouths should be. The man smiled at them. "Told you. Not everything up here sleeps at night." The shapes in the trees moved closer. They didn't think, they just ran. Branches tore at their faces, roots snagged at their boots, but somehow they burst back into the clearing with the tower. But it wasn't the same. The steel frame leaned slightly, the steps slick with something dark. The cabin at the top looked wrong, like it was bending subtly in the wind though the air was still. "Up!" Ethan said, grabbing Lauren's arm. They climbed, the structure groaning under their weight. From the top, they could see them, dozens of the pale, wrong-limbed things gathering below, their heads tilting in perfect unison to stare up at them. In the middle of the swarm stood the man in the red flannel. His head tipped back, mouth slit opening too wide. The things below didn't rush the tower. They moved with the same slow, deliberate pace Lauren had heard in the woods last night, one step at a time, arms swaying unnaturally. The man in red flannel never looked away from them. His slit mouth moved, but no sound came out. Then, all at once, the creatures began to climb. Their hands hooked over the rusted steel beams, fingers stretching further than fingers should. The sound of nails scraping against metal filled the air. Ethan kicked one in the head as it reached the second platform. Its neck bent sideways like wet rope. It didn't fall, it simply adjusted and kept climbing. Lauren scanned the ground below. The trail out was gone, just solid wall of trees where they'd come from. "They're surrounding us," she shouted. Ethan was already rifling through his pack. He pulled out a small hatchet and held it like a lifeline. The first creature reached their platform. Up close, its skin looked like wet paper stretched over bone. No eyes, no nose, just that vertical slit opening and closing with a sound like tearing cloth. Ethan buried the hatchet in its chest. It didn't bleed, just staggered back, clutching the wound as if puzzled, then lunged again. Lauren shoved it over the railing. It hit the ground and instantly began climbing again. From below, the man's voice finally reached them, soft but clear. "You can't stay up there forever," he called. "They'll wait. They've always waited." Lauren shouted down, "What do you want?" He smiled, or maybe he just stretched the slit wider. "A trade. One of you comes down, and the other walks away." Ethan's grip tightened on the hatchet. "Go to hell." The man chuckled. "Hell's a long way down. This is closer." As if on cue, the creatures renewed their climb, faster now. Lauren's eyes darted to the small lantern in their gear. An idea formed. "Help me," she told Ethan, pulling a bottle of Mason's leftover fuel from his pack. They doused the lantern's rag wick and lit it, the flame roaring higher than it should. When the next creature pulled itself onto the platform, Lauren shoved the lantern into its chest. It didn't scream, but its skin ignited instantly, flames spreading up its body like paper catching fire. The smell was unbearable. The thing fell, and the others below drew back, hissing in perfect unison. They bought time. But not much. Night deepened, and the cold gnawed at their fingers. They couldn't stay awake forever. The man hadn't moved from the center of the clearing. His voice drifted up again, almost kindly. "You'll be tired soon. That's when they'll come. Better to choose now." Ethan looked at Lauren. His eyes were bloodshot, jaw set hard. "We're not giving him anything," he said. But Lauren couldn't stop thinking about Mason, how quiet his disappearance had been. No scream, No fight. Just gone. The wind picked up. Below, the pale shapes swayed in unison, like grass in a current. And then, the first hand gripped the railing again. The first creature cleared the railing before Ethan could swing. It hit him hard, the weight of it knocking them both against the wall of the tower. Lauren grabbed the hatchet and buried it in its back. It turned its head 180 degrees to look at her, no eyes, no expression, just the slit pulling wider until it split the skin at the corners. Two more climbed over the side. The platform groaned under the extra weight. One of the supports let out a sharp metallic ping, and the entire tower swayed. Lauren realized with a sick drop in her stomach, the creatures weren't just climbing. They were pulling the tower down. The tower's legs gave way on one side. Ethan shouted, grabbing Lauren's arm as the platform tilted. They tumbled against the railing, the world turning sideways. The fall wasn't far, but it was enough to knock the wind out of her. The moment she hit the ground, the pale shapes closed in. Ethan swung the hatchet wildly, buying them seconds. The man in red flannel stepped forward, still smiling. "You fall into the hollow," he said softly, "and it keeps you." Something hit Ethan from behind. He went down, swallowed in the shifting mass of limbs. His scream cut short. Lauren ran. She didn't think about direction, just away. The woods twisted around her, the trail vanishing, then reappearing, then bending the wrong way. Branches clawed her face. Roots tripped her. She could hear them behind her, dozens of feet moving in perfect rhythm. She stumbled into a clearing. Not the one with the man. This one was smaller, but the ground was the same, bare, blackened earth in a perfect circle. At its center was Mason's boot. Just one. Upright, as if he'd stepped out of it and kept walking without noticing. A voice spoke from the trees. Not the man's, this one was higher, raspier. "They've been here longer than the trees," it said. "Longer than the hills." Lauren turned, but saw only darkness between the trunks. "They take what's lost," the voice went on. "And they keep it. Not dead. Not alive. Just kept." The shapes emerged again, pale and tall, moving without sound. The nearest one tilted its head, and the slit mouth whispered a sound that made her skin crawl. It was her name. Lauren ran until her legs gave out. The forest swallowed every direction, and the night pressed down until she could barely breathe. When she finally stopped, she realized the trees had closed in around her. The path she'd come from was gone. Something cold touched her shoulder. She didn't remember falling, but suddenly she was on her knees, looking up at the blank faces leaning over her. The slit mouths moved in unison, whispering her name again and again. The man in red flannel stepped forward, crouched beside her, and smiled that too wide smile. "Now," he said gently, "you're part of the trail." The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was the tower in the distance, whole again, standing straight, as if nothing had ever happened. But in the cabin at the top, two shapes stood side by side, watching the forest. Whisper Lake. Casey was the one who found the place. "Totally off-grid," she said, leaning over her phone at the diner table. "No cell service, no other campers, just us and the lake." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like the setup to a true crime podcast." "I'm in," said Drew, their quietest friend. "It'll be good to disappear for a while." It was September, the air crisp enough to smell like the coming cold. They loaded 2 tents, fishing gear, and more whiskey than food into Mark's old SUV. By the time they reached the gravel access road, the GPS had long since given up. Whisper Lake lived up to its name. The water was still as glass, the pines on the far shore doubled in perfect reflection. No sound but the crunch of their boots on the shore. Someone, long ago, had built 3 wooden docks. Only one still stood, jutting out into the black water like a finger pointing toward the far bank. "Creepy in a good way," Casey said, grinning as she set her pack down. They pitched tents near the tree line, cooked over a small fire, and drank until the stars blurred. At some point, Drew wandered down to the dock alone. He stood there for a long time, staring into the water. Mark woke to the sound of someone whispering outside his tent. He thought it was Casey, but when he unzipped the flap, no one was there. The fire was out and the lake looked darker than the sky. In the morning, Drew was pale and distant. "Didn't sleep much," he muttered. "The water's loud at night." Casey frowned. "What do you mean?" "It's dead quiet here." Drew just shook his head. They found the ranger's hut while hiking along the shore. It was abandoned, the door hanging open. Inside, among moldy maps and waterlogged logs, Casey found a single sheet of paper pinned to the wall. "Warning, do not sleep by the water. The lake remembers." The rest of the text had been scratched out until the paper tore. Mark laughed it off, but Casey folded the paper and kept it in her pocket. That night, Casey woke to the sound of Drew unzipping his tent. She sat up and watched him walk barefoot toward the dock. His posture was stiff, movements jerky, like he was being pulled forward. The water was whispering again. Not words, just the sound of someone speaking too low to hear, rising and falling with the breeze. When Drew reached the end of the dock, he stepped to the edge and leaned forward, as if listening harder. Then, without hesitation, he stepped into the lake. Casey screamed his name, waking Mark. They ran to the dock, but the water was still. No splash, no ripples. Mark dove in, kicking down into the black. When he surfaced, gasping, Drew was standing on the dock behind them. His clothes were dry. "How?" Mark started, but Drew walked past without answering and zipped himself back into his tent. The next morning, Drew acted like nothing had happened. Casey watched him closely as they ate breakfast. His skin was paler than usual, almost translucent, and his eyes, they seemed to catch the light differently, flashing a silver sheen when he turned his head. They went fishing. Drew caught nothing but stared at the water with an intensity that made Casey uneasy. That night, the whispers grew louder. This time, Casey thought she could make out words, syllables that didn't belong to any language she knew. Mark disappeared during the night. Casey woke to find his sleeping bag empty, his boots by the fire. She ran to the dock. Mark was waist deep in the lake, looking up at the moon, lips moving. She screamed, and he turned, but his eyes were silver like Drew's now. They both came out of the water and walked toward her. Casey backed away until she hit the tree line. Neither of them ran. They just kept walking, calm and slow. She didn't sleep that night. Back at the ranger hut, Casey searched for more records. In a drawer under the desk, she found a water-damaged leather journal. Most of the ink had bled, but one page was still legible. The lake doesn't drown them. It keeps them. The more it keeps, the louder it gets. When she returned to camp, Drew and Mark were gone. Their tents were zipped, but inside were only their clothes. As if they had stepped out of them the way you'd leave wet gear behind. She took the canoe that had been tied up by the dock and paddled toward the opposite shore. Halfway across, the water under her changed, from dark blue to a murky, shifting silver, as if something huge was moving just below. She looked over the side and saw faces below the surface. Some she recognized from missing person posters she'd seen back in town. Others were strangers. All of them were staring up at her with silver eyes. Something cold closed around her ankle. She kicked free, nearly tipping the canoe, and paddled hard until she hit shore. She found the ruins of old cabins hidden in the trees. Inside one, she saw children's toys, wood warped, paint flaked away. A calendar on the wall was still open to August 1974. In the next cabin, a man sat by a dead fireplace. His skin was cracked and dry, like he hadn't touched water in years. "You shouldn't have come," he rasped. "It remembers everything you give it. Faces. Voices. Names." The man told her there was only one way to leave, to give the lake something it wanted more than her. "But it always comes for what it lost," he warned. Casey waited by the dock that night, holding the journal in one hand and the whiskey in the other. She poured the entire bottle into the water, whispering her name into the ripples. The lake whispered back. Mark came first, then Drew, walking out of the water together. Their eyes were human again. They didn't remember anything after the first night. They packed in silence and left before sunrise. The lake stayed still. No whispers followed them into the trees. Back in town, Casey dropped the journal on the diner counter and told the waitress to burn it. The waitress just frowned. "Never heard of Whisper Lake," she said. A week later, Casey saw something strange in her bathroom mirror. For just a second, her eyes flashed silver. That night, someone knocked on her door. When she opened it, no one was there, only a wet footprint leading away down the hall. She woke to the sound of water lapping at her floor. Her apartment was dry. But when she looked at her reflection in the window, the lake was behind her. It whispered her name. "The pines have teeth." It started with a group text from Ben. "Got us the spot. Nobody's been there in years. No cell service, no fees, no rules. We leave Friday." Eli almost said no. He hated camping, hated bugs, hated the smell of wood smoke that clung to your clothes. But Ben had been his best friend since childhood, and it had been years since they'd done anything together besides the occasional beer after work. "Who's going?" Eli texted back. "Me, you, Kara, and Jess," Ben replied. "And maybe Nate if he can get the time off." Eli sighed, then typed, "Fine. But I'm not eating anything freeze-dried." They left in Ben's battered Ford Explorer, the back crammed with tents, sleeping bags, coolers, and a Bluetooth speaker Kara insisted on blasting. The highway turned to a two-lane blacktop, then a cracked gravel road. Trees thickened around them until they formed a tunnel of green. After 2 hours without seeing another car, Ben grinned in the rearview mirror. "Told you this place is perfect. My uncle used to bring me here when I was a kid." Jess leaned forward from the back seat. "Why'd he stop coming?" Ben shrugged. "Dunno. Probably just got old." They found the site where the road ended, a wide clearing surrounded by towering pines. A rusted fire ring sat in the middle, half buried in pine needles. Eli noticed something strange about the trees. Their trunks were unnaturally straight, each one spaced almost exactly the same distance from the next, like soldiers standing in formation. "Looks like someone planted these on purpose," Eli muttered. Kara rolled her eyes. "Trees don't scare me. Spiders do." While the others unpacked, Eli wandered toward the tree line. The moment he stepped into the shade, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. Something moved deeper in the pines, not the rustle of a squirrel or bird, but a slow, deliberate shifting, like someone dragging a stick through the dirt. He froze, listening. The sound stopped. When he stepped back into the sunlight, the warmth returned instantly. That night, they sat around the fire drinking and telling stories. Halfway through Jess's ghost story, a voice called from the trees. "Go home." Everyone went still. "Ben," Kara whispered, "tell me that was Nate messing with us." Ben shook his head slowly. "Nate couldn't make it." The voice didn't come again, but none of them slept well. Morning brought weak sunlight and a low fog drifting through the pines. Eli went to gather firewood and stopped dead at the tree line. There were tracks in the pine needles, barefoot, human-sized, leading out from the woods toward the clearing and then back in again. He followed them a few steps, but they vanished deeper in the fog. When he returned to camp, Ben was boiling coffee. "See anything?" he asked. Eli hesitated. "Just deer." After breakfast, Jess suggested exploring. They found an old trail behind the clearing, narrow and half-swallowed by roots. Every few minutes, Eli heard a hollow thunk, thunk, thunk somewhere ahead, like wood being struck. But when they stopped walking, it stopped too. The trail ended at a rotten picnic table and a strange structure, a tall, thin post wrapped in strips of leather and hung with small bones. "Some kind of art?" Kara asked. Ben's face was pale. "My uncle used to tell me not to mess with these. Said they mark where the woods aren't safe." Jess gave a short laugh. "And this is supposed to be the safe part." That evening, the air felt wrong, too still, as if the forest were holding its breath. Around midnight, Eli woke to movement outside his tent. Slow footsteps circled, pine needles crunching softly. He held his breath until the steps stopped. A long moment passed. Then something pressed lightly against the thin nylon wall, a palm, cold even through the fabric. In the morning, Kara's tent was gone. Not torn down. Not collapsed. Just gone. Her sleeping bag lay in the dirt where she'd been. There was no sign of her in any direction. As they searched, a voice came from the pines again. This time, closer. "Go home, before it takes you." Jess bolted back toward the clearing. Ben and Eli followed. By noon they had their gear packed and were back in Ben's Explorer, Kara still missing. The gravel road was just as they'd come in for about 20 minutes. Then, without warning, it narrowed into two deep ruts and ended in a wall of pines. "This isn't possible," Ben muttered. "We came straight in. There's no turn." They tried another direction, cutting through the clearing, but every track they followed ended at more forest. That night, the pines seemed closer to the camp. The perfect spacing between trunks was still there, unnervingly exact, but the perimeter felt tighter. Jess swore she saw a shape move between them. Tall. Lean. Watching. Eli woke to a new sound, whispering, dozens of voices overlapping, coming from the woods. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent, insistent. When he peeked out, the trunks were glowing faintly in the moonlight, as if lit from within. Just before dawn, Kara walked back into camp. Barefoot. Clothes damp with dew. Eyes blank. When Jess tried to hug her, Kara stiffened. "I told you to go home," she said in a voice that wasn't hers. She lay down in her old sleeping bag and didn't move again. That day, Ben tried the road again. Eli and Jess stayed behind with Kara. After hours, the explorer returned, but only Ben was inside. "Where's Jess?" Eli asked. Ben's hands were shaking. "She followed something into the trees. I couldn't stop her." That night, Eli and Ben sat by the fire, both too scared to sleep. "Something's hurting us," Ben said finally. making us smaller in number. Eli didn't answer. He was staring at the tree line, where tall shadows stood just beyond the glow, motionless, but breathing. Close to midnight, the pines moved. Not the branches, the trunks. They shifted forward with a groaning sound, roots tearing from the soil. In the moonlight, Eli saw it clearly, jagged splinters where bark should be, like teeth in a wooden jaw. Ben ran for the road. Eli stayed rooted to the spot, frozen with terror. The shadows followed Ben, moving impossibly fast between the trees. He didn't scream when they caught him, just vanished into the dark with a snapping sound. Kara stood now, eyes fixed on Eli. "It doesn't want you yet," she said. "But it will. Everyone belongs to the pines in the end." She walked into the woods, her form swallowed by the perfect rows of trunks. By dawn, the trees had fully surrounded the clearing. The road was gone. The fire ring sat at the exact center of a living wall. Eli knew there was nowhere to go. The voices whispered all day. Sometimes they sounded like Ben. Sometimes like Jess. Sometimes like his own mother. They told him to step into the shade. Just one step. That night, a figure emerged, half human, half pine. Skin like bark, hair a tangle of needles. "You can join them now," it rasped, "or feed them later." Eli didn't answer. By morning, hunger and thirst had eroded his resolve. He stepped into the shade. The cold hit him instantly, stealing his breath. The pine shifted to make way, guiding him deeper. In the darkness between trunks, he found the others. Kara, Ben, Jess, all standing still, skin darkened, eyes blank. Roots coiled around their legs, threading into their flesh. He tried to scream, but the pine needles filled his mouth. When the next campers arrived years later, they admired the perfect symmetry of the pines. One was new, its bark smooth, its branches still thin. If they'd listened closely, they might have heard whispering in the wind. The last campsite. It was the kind of thrift shop that smelled like wet cardboard and cedar chips. Dust motes drifted in the light from a single cracked skylight, and the floor creaked in places like it was trying to warn you where not to step. Ty wasn't there for anything in particular, just killing time in Missoula while his friends grabbed groceries for the trip. He had been flipping through a battered crate of National Geographic magazines from the 80s when something slipped out between two issues. It was a folded topo map, the kind you'd expect a park ranger to have in a back pocket. The paper was yellowed, edges curled. There, in the northwest quadrant of the Lolo National Forest, was a small red X, marked not with ink but wax pencil. Beside it, in faint, smudged handwriting. Last campsite. Don't stay past night 3. Ty turned it over, looking for a price tag. "That one's not for sale," said the clerk, a man in his 60s with eyes that seemed to sink back into his skull. He leaned on the counter and added, "It's just a map. Take it if you want." Ty almost asked about the writing but decided against it. Some thrift shop guy's story about weird campers wouldn't matter once he and his friends were sitting beside a lake with a cooler of beer. He folded the map, slipped it into his jacket, and walked out into the late August heat. By the time they were all packed into Lauren's dented Subaru, the map had become the center of conversation. Miguel was sprawled in the back seat, his baseball cap tilted low, teasing Ty about falling for hipster treasure hunts. Hannah, in the passenger seat, studied the penciled note with a frown. "It's probably some Forest Service thing," she said. "Or a joke." Lauren, tightening her grip on the steering wheel, asked, "What if it's like a geocache? We could get free stuff. Or it's haunted. Either way, worth it." The drive into the forest was long enough for the air to change. Pavement gave way to gravel, which gave way to a narrow dirt road that twisted upward into switchbacks. Pine needles whispered against the car doors. When they passed the ranger station, it was clearly abandoned. The windows were covered in grime. The door hung crooked, banging softly in the wind. Ty, curious, hopped out and pushed it open. Inside, the place smelled of mold and rodent musk. A faded safety poster hung on one wall, its corners curling away. If you hear it, keep walking. Do not look back. The paper had bubbled from water damage. The floor was soft under Ty's boots. There was no sign of anyone. They started the hike in the late afternoon, packs heavy with gear, the map folded in Ty's cargo pocket. The forest here felt denser than any of them remembered from past trips. Sunlight had to fight to reach the ground. Every so often, the trail opened into perfect circular clearings, no underbrush, just bare dirt, as if the ground itself had rejected growth. Miguel called them forest crop circles and stepped into one, pretending to search for aliens. Hannah didn't laugh. It was nearly dusk when they found the first sign of old camping activity, a stone fire ring, long cold, with a rusted enamel mug lying inside. A pair of broken sunglasses lay in the dirt nearby, the lenses spiderwebbed with cracks. They followed a narrow game trail toward the sound of water and reached a river so clear the stones beneath seemed magnified, edges sharp enough to cut bare feet. Ty knelt to splash his face. The water was colder than he expected, almost metallic. Dinner was pasta cooked over the fire, eaten from dented titanium bowls. They sat in the warm glow, talking about work, about people they hadn't seen in years. But the forest didn't join in. No crickets. No wind in the branches. Just the faint hiss of burning pine. Ty's sleeping bag felt like a cocoon, but sleep wouldn't come. The silence had weight. Then, faint but distinct, he heard it. Breathing, steady and slow, not from the camp but somewhere deeper in the woods. He told himself it was a deer. Maybe a bear. Sometime after midnight, a voice slid through the darkness. Close, so close he felt the warmth of it against his ear. Not yet. Ty sat bolt upright, flashlight beam slicing through the tent walls. No shadows moved. No one stirred. But outside, the trees stood perfectly still, like they were listening. Ty didn't tell the others about the whisper. Morning brought enough unease without adding ghosts to the list. The air was colder than it should have been for late August, their breath puffing like it was October. They decided to follow the map's path toward the X. The trail narrowed until it was just a thread through undergrowth, and those circular clearings kept appearing. No footprints, no camp trash, no sign of wildlife, not even a bird call. At midday, they found something nailed to a cedar tree, a strip of canvas with a single word written in black marker. 3. Miguel tried to laugh it off. Countdown to what? Our doom. But no one joined in. By afternoon, the forest had subtly changed. The trees grew so close their trunks seemed to merge. The river ran beside them, but now its water was clouded, like glass breathed on. That night, Ty dreamed of the voice again, only now it stood somewhere beyond the tree line, saying the same two words over and over, not yet. Not yet. When he woke, there were damp footprints outside his tent, bare human feet, facing inward. On the second day, Lauren spotted something across the river, another strip of canvas tied to a branch. This one read, TWO. Ty didn't like that it lined up with the penciled warning on the map, don't stay past night 3. They pressed on, more out of stubbornness than curiosity. But now the forest seemed to fight them. The trail looped back on itself in ways that made no sense. Ty swore they passed the same uprooted pine twice in an hour. By evening, Hannah refused to go further. They camped in one of the barren clearings. That night, Ty woke to the sound of Miguel talking in his sleep. Only he wasn't speaking, he was whispering. Ty leaned closer and realized it wasn't Miguel's voice at all. It was the same one from before, coming through Miguel, saying, "You should have left." Then Miguel's eyes opened, not startled, just empty. He closed them again, rolled over, and went still. Morning brought the third canvas strip. 1. They argued about turning back. Lauren was pale, her lips chapped and cracked despite drinking water. Hannah said she'd been dreaming of drowning, not in the river, but in something black and still, where she couldn't even feel her own heartbeat. Ty led them onward anyway, stubbornly tracking toward the red X. The forest grew darker. The air took on a copper taste, and they began hearing faint movements parallel to their path. Not footsteps, exactly, but the sound of something large shifting its weight. At the last bend before the X, they found the remnants of another campsite, rotted tents, gear scattered like it had been dropped mid-run, a boot with the laces still tied. And something else, a fourth canvas strip hanging from a branch, blank this time. That night, Ty didn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., a tall figure stepped into the firelight. No face. No eyes. Just a black outline where light didn't seem to stick. It didn't move closer. It just raised one long arm and pointed to the river. By morning, Miguel was gone. His sleeping bag lay open, still warm, as if he'd stepped out moments before. No footprints led away from camp. The river was louder now, its water darker, churning against its banks like something trying to get out. They reached the X by mid-afternoon. It was nothing but another clearing, but in its center was a perfectly round hole in the ground, maybe 10 feet wide, with water black as oil at the bottom. The wind had died completely. Lauren whispered, "We shouldn't be here." From the trees came the voice, now louder, layered with dozens of others, all saying, "Now." The ground softened under Ty's feet like wet paper. Hannah screamed as something pale and jointed as a spider's leg slid from the hole, wrapping around her ankle. Lauren turned to run but was yanked backward by nothing Ty could see. Ty backed away, eyes locked on the hole. In its surface, he saw not his reflection, but a campsite, their campsite, empty except for shadowy figures standing at the edges. The leg tightened around Hannah, pulling her into the black water. Her scream cut off the instant her head submerged. The voice whispered one last time, almost gently. "Last campsite." The ground gave way, and Ty fell. The locals say the map is still out there. Sometimes it turns up in a thrift store or a garage sale, always marked with the same red X. And the ones who follow it? They never stay past night 3. Not because they leave. Because something else makes sure they don't. Hollow Creek. The trail to Hollow Creek didn't exist on park maps. You had to know where to look for the split in the timberline, a faint indentation in the underbrush that disappeared after a few yards unless you kept your eyes low and your feet steady. Evan knew about it because his grandfather had told him the story years ago, though he hadn't believed it at the time. Something about a creek that ran wrong and a family that went missing in '79. It sounded like one of those mountain ghost stories meant to scare kids from wandering too far. Now, 26 and restless, Evan figured it would make a great weekend trip with his friends, Jenna, Miles, and Cara. They'd all been looking for something different from the overbooked state park campgrounds. Something wild. Something real. The first half of the hike was pure postcard beauty, late summer Appalachian green, shafts of gold sunlight, the air damp with the scent of fern and wet stone. No cell service, no other hikers. It was Miles who noticed the quiet first. No birds, he said, and it was true. The deeper they went, the more the forest seemed to swallow sound. By mid-afternoon, they reached the water. Hollow Creek was only 6 feet across, shallow enough to see the stones on the bottom. But the current was wrong. Instead of flowing in one direction, it seemed to move both ways at once, small ripples pushing upstream and downstream in the same breath. Evan smiled. "Looks like we found our spot." That night, they pitched tents beside the creek. The water made a low, steady gurgle that should have been comforting, but somehow wasn't. When the moon came up, its reflection in the water didn't shimmer. It stayed still, even though the current moved. Around 2 a.m., Evan woke to the sound of something walking in the water. Heavy steps, slow, deliberate, like someone wading upstream. He unzipped his tent and shone his flashlight toward the creek. Nothing. Just the water, flowing both ways. Morning came with a haze over the hollow, the kind that blurred the line between air and water. The sunlight didn't pierce it so much as dissolve into it, making the creek look wider than it had the night before. Kara crouched at the bank, staring into the water. "It's different," she said. Evan rubbed the sleep from his eyes. "What is?" "The rocks. They weren't in the same place yesterday." He stepped beside her. She was right, the creek bed had rearranged itself. Larger stones that had been near the far bank were now in the center, smaller pebbles pushed to the sides. Miles yawned. "Maybe the current did it." "Sure," Kara said. "Except the current here doesn't make sense." Breakfast was quick and quiet, granola bars and instant coffee, and then they went exploring upstream. The trail along the water was soft and black with rot, smelling faintly of iron. They found no signs of animals, not even tracks in the mud. 200 yards upstream, the banks narrowed, and the creek ran into the side of a hill and vanished. The water didn't pool, didn't overflow, it just slipped under a wall of slate and was gone. "That's not normal," Jenna said. She tossed in a stick and watched it drift toward the slate. It disappeared without slowing, as though swallowed. Evan checked his watch. "It's probably an underground channel. There's a spring on the other side of the ridge. I read about this." "Then why does it come out both ways?" Kara asked. Evan didn't answer. That afternoon, the ground beneath camp felt hollow. Not in a metaphorical way, literally. If you stomped, the earth gave back a muffled echo, like striking the lid of an empty barrel. They all noticed it. No one wanted to be the first to say it out loud. By sunset, the fog had thickened again. The creek's current looked stronger, but the surface remained perfectly smooth. The reflection of the moon, not yet risen in the real sky, floated there, pale and wrong. That night, Miles didn't sleep. He kept hearing the sound of something brushing against the underside of the ground, like water against wood. Every few minutes, there was a faint tap-tap, as though someone were knocking from below. And then, close to 3 a.m., a voice. Muffled. Wet. Coming from beneath his tent floor. "Let us up. If you want, I can jump into section 3, where the creek starts to spread through the forest and the ground gives way in places, revealing what's been trapped below." By morning, Miles looked pale and jittery. He hadn't told the others what he heard, not yet. But he couldn't stop replaying it in his mind. The voice hadn't sounded angry. It had sounded patient. When they unzipped their tents, they found the creek had moved. Not just swelled from rain. moved. It now cut directly through the center of camp, slicing between the tents. The bank where they'd made their fire pit was gone, eaten away. Their gear was damp as if mist had settled all night, even though the sky was clear. "This makes no sense," Jenna whispered. She dipped her boot in. "It's not cold." Evan crouched beside her. Creeks don't change course overnight unless there's flooding, and he stopped, staring upstream. The creek was wider there, disappearing under the slate hill as before. But now the water bulged, like something beneath it was pressing upward. They spent the morning hiking the perimeter, trying to find a safe place to cross. The hollow ground sensation followed them everywhere. Sometimes, when Evan walked ahead, the earth under his boots felt like thin ice, a layer between him and something moving just below. At noon, the first hole appeared. Kara was walking at the edge of the bank when the ground simply caved in. She screamed, scrambling backward, dirt tumbling into a jagged gap. Water gushed up immediately, filling it in seconds. When they looked in, it wasn't just water. The surface churned with shapes. Pale, shifting shapes. Hands? Faces? No, too quick to see clearly. Miles grabbed Kara's arm. "We're leaving. Now." They tried retracing their route out, but the forest had changed. Paths they'd walked yesterday were gone, replaced by black mud and ankle-deep pools. Trees leaned in strange directions, roots exposed, as if the soil had been washed out from underneath. By late afternoon, they were back at the creek, or maybe a different branch of it. The water was silent, but the ground around them hummed faintly, a low vibration they could feel in their bones. That night, none of them wanted to sleep. They built a fire high on a slope, as far from the water as they could manage. The fog rolled in thicker than ever, making the firelight weak. And then the tapping started again. This time, it wasn't muffled by dirt. It came from the trees. The sound moved from trunk to trunk, circling the camp. And beneath it, faint voices. "Let us up! Let us up!" The first tree fell just after midnight. It didn't break from wind, there wasn't any. It tipped slowly, almost gracefully, as the earth gave way beneath its roots. The fall exposed a black cavity beneath, the soil crumbling into a void that smelled of rot and stagnant water. Something moved down there. Miles shone his flashlight into the gap. For a second, they saw it, skin like milk left too long in the sun, limbs too long to be human, eyes reflecting the beam in a dull, silvery glow. Then it slid backward into the dark, water splashing faintly. "Jesus Christ," Kara whispered. The ground shuddered. A sound like rushing water came from all around, as though the creek now ran under every inch of the hollow. They grabbed their packs, no time to roll tents, and ran. Every few yards, the soil dipped and groaned beneath them. Pools appeared where there had been dry ground minutes earlier. Somewhere behind them, a voice rose above the rush. "Evan?" It was drawn out, almost playful. He froze mid-step, looking over his shoulder. No one was there, but the fog in that direction swirled like something had just moved through it. Jenna pulled him forward. "Don't stop. Keep going." The forest began to split open in seams, long cracks revealing the black water underneath. Sometimes pale hands reached out of the gaps, impossibly thin fingers grasping the air. The voices multiplied, overlapping, some pleading, some laughing. They scrambled uphill, thinking higher ground might mean safety. The humming in the soil turned to a vibration in their chests, so deep it made their ribs ache. At the ridge, they stopped to catch their breath. Below them, the entire hollow churned with movement, trees leaning, ground collapsing, the creek swelling into places it had never been. and then the slate hill split in two. From the rupture, water poured upward, not down. It carried with it shapes that broke the surface, pale torsos, hair streaming, eyes that had no whites. They dragged themselves onto the shifting banks, moving with an unnatural, jerking rhythm, as though unused to solid ground. Kara started crying. "We can't go back down there." Evan's voice was barely audible. "I don't think we have to. It's coming up here." They backed up the ridge until there was nowhere left to go. Behind them, the slope dropped into a ravine so steep that one wrong step would send them tumbling into darkness. Ahead, the pale things from the hollow dragged themselves upward, their hands sinking wrist-deep into the soil without effort. The fog thickened until it was hard to tell where ground ended and sky began. One of the figures reached the ridge first. Its skin clung in wet folds, its jaw hanging slightly open as if unhinged. Water streamed from its mouth. It paused, staring at them with those silver eyes, and spoke in a voice that sounded like it came from underwater. "You stood on us." Kara's breath caught. "What?" It tilted its head. "We were waiting." The ground was thin. "You made it thinner." Another figure pulled itself beside the first. This one was smaller, its movements twitchy, its fingers longer. Behind them, dozens more shapes were climbing the slope. Miles stepped forward with a broken branch, brandishing it like a spear. "Stay back." The first figure leaned forward into the firelight from Evan's torch. Its skin was smooth and pale, but beneath it, faint shadows writhed, as if something else was moving inside. "You will go down," it said. "Like the others." The ground under Miles shifted. Before anyone could move, the soil collapsed and he dropped waist-deep into freezing water. Hands closed around his legs, pulling hard. His scream cut short as the water rose over his chest. Evan grabbed his arms, heaving backward. For a moment, Miles's face was visible, eyes wide, mouth opening to shout something, and then he was yanked down with such force that Evan almost fell in after him. The water closed, leaving only black mud. Jenna broke. She bolted along the ridge, disappearing into the fog. Her footsteps lasted only seconds before they ended in a sharp cry and a splash far below. The creatures advanced. Kara was sobbing now, clutching Evan's arm so tightly her nails dug into his skin. Evan made a decision, not one he could explain, even to himself. He stepped forward toward the nearest figure. "What happens if we go willingly?" It smiled, the movement wrong on its face. "You sink. You join. You help hold the ground." The others were almost on them now, a wall of pale, dripping bodies. The humming in the earth was so loud it felt like their bones might shake apart. Kara's voice was a whisper. "Evan, please." But the ground was crumbling under their feet. When it gave way entirely, the last thing Kara saw was the silver reflection of a moon that shouldn't have been there, staring up from beneath the water. Then they were all falling, the cold closing over them, the voices rising in unison. "Let us up." Deadfall Ridge. The ridge looked smaller on the map. Noah folded the topo sheet against the wind, squinting at the contour lines. "We've got maybe another mile to the old hunting trail," he said. "Then it's smooth hiking for the rest of the day." Kim laughed and adjusted the straps on her pack. "You've been saying that since lunch." Behind them, Darius trudged without complaint, his pack loaded heavier than everyone else's combined. Amber lagged just enough to keep glancing over her shoulder at the thinning tree line behind them. The trail narrowed until it was barely a game path, pine boughs clawing at their jackets. A smell drifted through the still air, damp earth, but sharper somehow, like iron. Noah didn't comment, but he noticed the way Darius's jaw tightened when it hit him too. By late afternoon, the ground tilted upward and the trees grew denser, their trunks crowding close enough to blot out the sun. The air turned colder. At one point, a bird called from somewhere overhead, then stopped mid-note, as if cut off. They reached what Noah had marked as the old hunting trail. It wasn't there. Instead, the slope was buried under a massive tangle of deadfall, pines and spruce crisscrossed like a giant's game of pick-up sticks, the trunks stripped of branches and slick with moss. Beyond the fallen trees, boulders the size of cars loomed, wedged into the hillside as if a landslide had frozen in place decades ago. Amber's voice was small. "So, we're camping here." "Here-ish," Noah said, scanning the ridge for a flat spot. They found a narrow clearing between two leaning pines. The ground was soft and cold, but at least it was level. Noah and Darius set up tents while Kim collected wood for a small fire. Amber busied herself unpacking food, though her eyes kept drifting toward the deadfall like she expected something to move there. When night came, the ridge went silent. No wind, no rustle of animals. Just the occasional creak from somewhere deep in the tangle of fallen trees. Around the fire, Kim tried to lighten the mood. "So, what's the worst thing that could be in those woods?" "Bears," Amber said immediately. "Cougars," Darius offered. "Ticks," Noah said, deadpan. Kim grinned, but the joke fell flat in the stillness. They turned in early. Noah lay in his tent, half asleep, when he heard it, the sound of someone walking, slow and deliberate, in the deadfall. Too heavy for a deer. Too light for a bear. Then a voice, faint but clear. "Noah." It was Kim's voice. He unzipped the tent, heart pounding, but Kim was asleep beside him. From the darkness, the voice came again, farther away now. "Noah, come here." He shut the tent fast and didn't sleep again that night. Morning light did nothing to make the place feel safer. The ridge was draped in mist, the kind that clings low and refuses to burn off. The deadfall beyond camp looked like a bleached skeleton of the forest, all tangled bones and hollow gaps. Noah said nothing about the voice. He didn't want to start the day with paranoia, but he kept catching himself looking toward the tangle as they made breakfast. Darius was the first to break the quiet. Something was out there last night. Kim raised an eyebrow. "You heard it too?" He nodded, pouring instant coffee into his mug. "Footsteps. Thought it might be you or Noah taking a leak. But it stayed just past the edge of camp, circling." Amber set down her oatmeal and swallowed hard. "Circling?" "Like a predator." Darius didn't answer. After breakfast, they decided to check the trail again. Maybe there was a way through the deadfall that Noah had missed. The air inside that tangle was cooler, damper, and thick with a faint metallic tang. Noah led, stepping over slick trunks and ducking under limbs. Every movement made the pile shift and groan, as though the forest resented their intrusion. Half an hour in, they found it. A narrow gap where a tree had fallen against two boulders, leaving a passage underneath. Amber crouched to peer in. "Smells like," she stopped, covering her mouth. Noah caught it too, something rotten, deep and wet. He moved closer, flicking on his headlamp. The beam caught something pale wedged in the shadows. At first he thought it was a branch stripped of bark, until the shape resolved into a human forearm, mottled and bloated, disappearing into the dark. They scrambled back to camp without speaking. Amber was shaking. Kim kept glancing over her shoulder like she expected the owner of the arm to come crawling after them. Darius started packing. "We leave now. This isn't our problem." But Noah stared at the slope. There was no easy way down except the way they came, and the route back was 2 full days of hard hiking. If whatever was out here wanted to follow them. Kim spoke what he was thinking. We move now, we'll be sleeping out in the open tonight. No cover. Reluctantly, Darius stopped packing, but he never took his eyes off the deadfall. That night, the sound came again. This time it was Amber's voice in the dark. Soft. Close. Kim, help me. Kim bolted upright, but Amber was asleep in the other tent. The voice came again, from beyond the firelight. Kim's breath hitched. Noah. And then, from deeper in the deadfall, something laughed, high and broken, like it had learned the sound but didn't understand it. By morning, they'd made a decision, leave, even if it meant sleeping rough. Nobody argued this time. The laughter in the night had erased any illusions that it was just an animal. They packed fast, no coffee, no breakfast. The mist hadn't lifted, and the light through the trees looked wrong, dimmer than it should have been. Darius took point, moving fast down the slope they'd climbed 2 days before. The trail was steep, but he had the bearing locked in his head. He was the kind of man you trusted with directions. An hour later, the deadfall was in front of them again. Amber froze. We didn't turn around, did we? Darius swore under his breath. No. We went straight. Noah pulled out the compass. The needle spun slow, then twitched back and forth like it couldn't decide. Kim tried to keep her voice level. So we're lost. We're not lost, Darius snapped. Something screwing with. From somewhere deep in the tangle came a crash, wood splintering as if something massive had moved. The smell of rot drifted out with it. They backed off to the ridge's edge, trying another direction. For hours they pushed through thickets and rocky outcrops, avoiding the deadfall entirely. The light kept shifting strangely, brightening and dimming without clouds moving overhead. By mid-afternoon, they came upon their own campsite. The fire pit was still warm. Their boot prints from the morning were fresh in the dirt. Amber's breathing turned into a sharp, panicked whimper. Noah crouched by the pit, staring at the glowing embers. We've been walking in circles. No, Darius said, scanning the tree line. Something's been moving us. That night they didn't bother with a fire. They sat in darkness, eating cold food, listening. At first it was just the occasional crack of shifting wood from the deadfall. Then came the voices again. Not calling names this time. Talking. It was like hearing 4 or 5 people having a low conversation just far enough away that the words blurred, except every so often, one of the voices would perfectly imitate one of them. Noah's voice, we can't stay here. Kim's voice, it's in the trees. Amber's voice, it's in you. That last one made Amber clamp both hands over her ears. Around midnight, a single heavy step landed just outside the circle of their tents. Then another. Darius had his knife in hand, crouched low. Noah's flashlight beam cut across the trees and hit nothing. Just still, black trunks. But the steps kept coming, slow, deliberate, circling them. When they finally stopped, the forest went dead silent, like everything else in it was holding its breath. By the next morning, none of them had slept more than an hour. Every rustle of wind sounded like footsteps now. They agreed to make one last attempt at leaving, heading toward the sun's position in the sky no matter what. Darius cut marks into tree trunks as they went, proof they weren't looping back. By midday, the marks stopped appearing. Trees they'd passed minutes ago stood unscarred. Amber broke first. It's not letting us go. It's... A crash from behind cut her off, not the distant shifting they'd heard before, but close, violent, wood snapping like matchsticks. From between two leaning pines, it came crawling out. It was tall, too tall, but hunched, its limbs long and jointed wrong. The skin looked like tree bark in some places, exposed sinew in others, and the face, there wasn't a face. Just a smooth, pale surface where one should have been, with a ragged slit that opened and closed like a mouth trying to shape words. The voice that came out was Noah's. "Help me!" Amber screamed, and the thing's head twitched toward her. It moved in a jerking, insect-like lurch, hands splaying into hooked, bark-covered claws. Darius threw his hunting knife, catching it in the shoulder. It didn't bleed, it just stopped, tilted its head like it was learning something, then stepped back into the mist until the forest swallowed it whole. They ran. No one cared about direction anymore, just away. They pushed themselves until their legs burned, stopping only when Amber collapsed against a tree. Kim knelt beside her, but Noah kept scanning the fogged woods. "It's not chasing us." "Not yet," Darius said. "It's playing." That night, they didn't bother with the tents. They huddled together, knives out, facing outward. The forest came alive with sound, branches shifting, faint laughter, and the voices again. Only this time, they weren't just in the distance. They were right behind them. Just before dawn, Noah shook the others awake. "We move. Now." He had a plan: follow the slope downhill until they hit water. If they could find a stream, it might lead them out. They moved fast, ignoring the way the forest seemed to rearrange itself around them. Several times, Noah caught glimpses of the thing in the fog, keeping pace, always just out of reach. By mid-morning, they heard rushing water. The sound spurred them on, until they broke into a clearing and saw the truth. It wasn't a stream. It was their campsite. The fire pit had been filled in. Their gear, the stuff they'd left behind, was neatly piled in the center, like someone had been waiting for them to return. Amber's voice came from the trees. "We can go now." Only Amber was standing right next to Noah. The pale figure stepped out of the fog, wearing Amber's face now, her features stretched wrong, smiling too wide. Behind it, more shapes moved in the mist, tall, thin, jointed wrong. All of them with the faces of people they knew. Darius didn't wait. He charged, blade drawn, and vanished into the fog. His scream came a moment later, cut short. Kim grabbed Noah's arm. "Run!" They bolted into the white, branches whipping their faces, until the ground simply ended. A sheer drop, jagged rocks below, the mist swirling up from somewhere deep. Behind them, the voices closed in. Every voice they'd ever heard, all at once. Noah looked at Kim. She didn't say anything, just nodded. They jumped. The fog swallowed them whole. The lantern hunger. The gravel road ended in a choke of pines, the sunlight struggling to get through their thick needles. Eli cut the engine and sat for a moment, letting the sudden silence ring in his ears. The air smelled of damp earth and something sharp, pine resin, maybe, or the metallic tang of rain that hadn't yet come. Behind him, Jonas stretched his long legs out of the passenger seat. "Feels like we just drove into a tunnel," he said, peering at the narrow trailhead sign. Marina leaned forward from the back seat, her chin on Eli's shoulder. "It's supposed to open up once we're past the first mile." The ranger said it's beautiful this time of year. "Yeah," Sophie muttered from beside her. He also said no one else really hikes it. Eli smiled. "That's the point, Soph. We're getting away from people, remember?" Jonas grabbed his pack from the trunk. "Exactly. Off-grid, baby." They shouldered their gear and started down the trail, the four of them in single file. The pines closed in almost immediately, their trunks dark, their branches knitting overhead until the light became green and dim. Sophie kept close to Marina, her eyes darting toward every shift of shadow. "Why is it so quiet?" she asked softly. Eli glanced back. "It's early. Most birds aren't feeding yet." But the truth was, it was unusually quiet. No wind, no insects buzzing, just the steady crunch of boots on the packed dirt trail. After a mile, the trees began to thin. Shafts of golden light lanced through, catching on the damp leaves. Marina sighed, visibly relaxing. "Better. This is more like it." Jonas strode ahead, pointing to a ridge in the distance. "We set up there, we'll have a view for miles." They reached the ridge just before noon, the forest falling away on three sides to reveal rolling hills and a snaking river far below. They found a level spot among a cluster of birches and began to unpack. The campsite came together easily. 2 tents, one for Eli and Marina, the other for Jonas and Sophie. A ring of stones for the fire pit. Marina strung a torch between trees for shade, while Jonas wandered off to collect wood. Sophie lingered at the edge of the ridge, staring down at the valley. "It looks far away," she said when Eli joined her. "It is far away," he chuckled. "No, I mean, like it's moving. Like we're getting higher." He frowned but didn't see what she meant. By evening, the fire crackled and the smell of charred sausages drifted through the camp. Jonas told stories, half of them exaggerated or outright lies, and Marina rolled her eyes while Sophie laughed nervously. It wasn't until the first ember popped high into the air that Eli noticed something unusual. Down in the trees below the ridge, maybe 200 yards out, a light glimmered. Not the flicker of firelight. Not the steady glow of a house. Something in between, a pale, pulsing lantern light that seemed to sway in a slow rhythm. "You guys see that?" he asked. Jonas twisted in his seat. "Campers?" "Here?" Marina said. "There's no other trail access within 5 miles." The light swayed again, dipping low as if whoever held it had knelt. Sophie's voice was barely above a whisper. "It's looking at us." Eli shook his head. "It's light, soft." "It's not." The glow winked out. They didn't see it again that night. But as Eli lay in the tent, the last logs of the fire turning to ash, he thought he heard something out past the ridge, a faint shuffle, a foot dragging through leaves. Once, maybe twice. Enough that he found himself gripping the handle of the hatchet before he could sleep. Morning came bright and warm. Jonas wanted to explore further down the ridge toward the valley. Marina suggested they fish the river instead. Sophie wanted neither but followed anyway. The descent was steep, the air growing cooler and damper as they moved. The trees here were older, their trunks thick enough that 3 people couldn't wrap arms around them. Moss coated everything. An hour in, they stopped for water. Eli glanced up and froze. There it was again. The pale light, now ahead of them, between 2 massive oaks. It swayed gently, in a rhythm almost like breathing. Jonas grinned. "I knew someone else was out here." But when they stepped forward, the light drifted away, always just far enough that they couldn't quite make it out fully. It led them deeper, away from the river. The air felt heavier. Sophie's breaths came sharp and fast. "We're getting turned around," she said, voice shaking. "We should go back." Jonas kept moving. "Come on, just a little further." Eli felt the same pull, a quiet certainty that if they followed long enough, they'd understand what it was. The light dipped behind a rise, and when they crested it, they found a clearing. In the center stood a tall, blackened tree. Its bark was split, as if from lightning, but it pulsed faintly from within, the same rhythm as the lantern glow. Sophie whimpered, "That's not a tree." The light swelled, and every bird, every insect, every leaf around them went silent. They stood in the clearing longer than any of them realized. Later, Eli would swear it had been no more than a minute. Marina would insist it was closer to 10. Sophie, pale and trembling, claimed they'd been there for hours. The blackened tree loomed at the center, its trunk splitting like the seam of a wound. From inside, the pale light breathed, swelling, dimming, swelling again, steady as a heartbeat. Jonas took a step forward. "Jesus, what is this thing?" "Don't," Marina said sharply. He half turned to grin at her. "Relax. It's a tree. A freaky one, yeah, but..." The bark twitched. Just a ripple, as though something shifted beneath it. Jonas stopped mid-step. Eli's voice was low. "We're going back. Now." The return to camp felt wrong from the first turn. Paths that should have led uphill dipped down instead. Landmarks, rocks, clusters of birch were gone or changed. The air itself seemed heavier, warmer, as though the forest had shifted into late summer in the space of an hour. They tried following the sun, but it seemed to slide behind the treetops no matter which way they turned. Sophie kept glancing behind them, whispering, "It's still following. I can feel it." Eli wanted to tell her she was imagining things, but he couldn't shake the sense that the pulsing light was just beyond the trees, pacing them. When they finally stumbled into the ridge camp, it was late afternoon. Only, it wasn't. The fire pit was cold, the tarp sagged under a skin of dew, and their gear was damp, as if they'd been gone overnight. Marina checked her watch, then frowned. "This doesn't make sense. It's been, what, 3 hours?" Jonas shook his head. "No. My watch says 12. Minutes. Hours." Eli swallowed hard. We eat, we sleep, we head out tomorrow at first light." Nobody argued. That night, the wind returned, low and restless. Sometime after midnight, Eli woke to the sound of footsteps outside the tent, light, deliberate, circling. He eased the zipper down and peered out. The fire was nothing but ash. Beyond it, at the far edge of the ridge, stood a figure holding a lantern. It swayed in that same slow rhythm. The figure was tall, draped in something tattered. The light it held didn't spill outward the way fire should, it clung close, as if reluctant to touch the ground. Eli blinked. The figure was gone. Morning brought no relief. Sophie was pale, eyes ringed with dark circles. "It talked to me," she said over breakfast. "What do you mean?" Marina asked. "Last night. It stood outside the tent and it sounded like Mom. She said I should come see something. Said she found the way out." Eli set down his tin mug. "You didn't go out, right?" Sophie didn't answer right away. "Sophie." Marina pressed. Her voice was very small. "I unzipped the tent. Just a little. And it was closer." It smiled. By midday, they decided to pack and leave. The trail was gone. Where there had been a clear dirt path, there was now only undergrowth, ferns and brambles so thick they looked decades old. Eli hacked at them with the hatchet, but after half an hour they'd made almost no progress. Jonas tried climbing down the ridge to find the lower trail, but came back 10 minutes later, breathless. "It's all different. The valley's wrong. The river's gone." Marina shook her head. "That's not possible." Jonas looked at her, dead serious. "Then explain what I saw." That evening, as they sat in silence around the cold fire pit, the light appeared again. This time, it wasn't down in the valley. It was just inside the tree line. And there were two of them. They swayed in unison, pale and patient. By midday, the trees opened into another clearing. In the center stood the blackened trunk from the first day, the seam in its bark glowing. Only now, the light was joined by whispers, dozens of voices layered together, some pleading, some laughing. Sophie stepped forward before Eli could stop her. "It has the way out," she murmured. The seam in the bark widened, spilling that pale light across the ground. Shapes moved inside, human silhouettes, faces they knew. Eli grabbed Sophie, but her skin was cold and her eyes unfocused. "It's fine," she said. "We'll be home soon." The ground beneath them shifted. Roots rose like snakes, wrapping around their boots. The last thing Eli saw before the light swallowed them was Marina's face, mouth open in a scream that made no sound. Somewhere, far away, on a ridge no one visited anymore, for new light swayed at the edge of the trees. The Timberline Watcher. The trailhead parking lot was empty when they pulled in just after dawn, their boots clunking onto the gravel like punctuation marks in the cold air. Claire stretched her arms over her head, watching her breath drift into the pale blue. They had maybe 12 hours of light, and she wanted every second above the tree line before nightfall. "Feels like we're the only ones up here," Dustin said, slinging his pack over his shoulders. "That's because we are," Mara replied, camera already in her hands. "Everyone else is smart enough to wait until July." Evan zipped his windbreaker tight and checked the topo map. "Forecast says gusts up to 45 later, so if it starts howling, we're turning back." Claire smiled. "You've clearly never hiked with me." The first hour was steady climbing, switchbacks cut into a slope thick with cedar and Douglas fir, the air sharp with the scent of sap. Sunlight spilled between trunks in long vertical blades, but the deeper they went, the quieter it became. By the third mile, the sound of the highway was gone, replaced by the occasional creak of a branch shifting overhead. Mara kept stopping for photos, crouching to frame shots of frost-clung moss or backlit pine needles. Dustin wandered ahead, hands in his pockets, humming softly. Evan, the slowest of the four, kept glancing back down the trail as though expecting someone else to appear. They broke for lunch just before the tree line, a sloping meadow where patches of snow lingered like forgotten laundry. The ridge loomed above them, jagged and pale, the sky already a deeper blue at that altitude. "All right," Claire said, stuffing the last of her granola bar into her mouth. "Let's make the push." "We camped just over the saddle. Should be sheltered from the wind." They crossed into the alpine zone, where the trees thinned and the wind hit like a blade. The air carried that dry, metallic cold that scraped the back of the throat. Far below, the forest looked like a dark ocean, the treetops shivering in gusts they couldn't feel up here. At the saddle, they found the old fire ring Claire had been aiming for, just a scattering of stones half buried in scree. A small ledge offered a view westward, where the sun was already flirting with the mountains. They pitched the tents fast, fingers numbing in the wind. Dinner was instant noodles eaten from steaming cups, the broth cooling almost as fast as they could swallow it. Mara was on her stomach, lining up a shot of the fading light on the glacier. Dustin was wrapped in his sleeping bag, sipping tea. That was when the wind stopped. Not eased, stopped. Like a switch flipped. Claire looked up sharply. Her ears popped in the silence. No rustle of fabric, no whisper of air in the grass. Even the distant trees below seemed frozen. From somewhere higher on the ridge came the sound of bootsteps on rock. Slow. Deliberate. Evan turned toward the noise, his face tightening. That's not an echo. The steps came closer, then stopped. Mara raised her camera, lens aimed at the ridgeline. I don't see anyone. A shadow moved against the sky, tall, narrow, wrong. It lingered just long enough for Claire to register its stillness before the wind came back all at once, slamming into the tents and rattling the guy lines. When she looked again, the shadow was gone. The wind battered the camp for hours after sundown, turning the tents into snapping sails. Sleep was impossible. Every time Claire's eyes drifted shut, a fresh gust slapped the fabric like an open palm. She lay listening to Dustin's breathing beside her, waiting for the rhythm to deepen. It was close to midnight when the air went still again. The change was so sudden it made her sit up, heart pounding. Outside, silence pressed down like weight. She could hear the nylon walls of the tent relaxing in slow crinkles. Then, faint and precise, the sound of footsteps on stone again. Dustin stirred. What? Chill. She touched his arm. The steps circled the camp. 3, 4 paces, pause, 3 more. No heavy boots, something lighter, but too crisp for bare feet. From Mara's tent came the rip of a zipper. Hello, her voice called out, uncertain. The steps stopped. Then a voice answered, Dustin's voice. Hey, it's me. Come here. Claire's stomach flipped. Dustin was still beside her. She could feel the heat of him through his sleeping bag. Mara made a confused noise. Dustin? How? Don't, Claire barked, unzipping her own tent and shoving her boots on. The cold hit her like a slap as she stepped out. Her headlamp beam cut through the darkness, slicing across boulders and scrub. Mara was half out of her tent, eyes wide. Stay inside, Claire ordered. Something moved just beyond the edge of the light, tall and thin, its face turned away. Its outline seemed to shimmer, like heat above asphalt. Evan's voice called from behind a boulder. Mara, can you come help me with something? Mara froze. Evan? But Evan's head poked out of his own tent, hair mussed from sleep. What? The thing slipped out of the beam and was gone. The wind returned a heartbeat later, roaring through the gap in the saddle. Morning brought an exhausted, uneasy silence between them. They packed slowly, eyes drifting often to the ridgeline. Mara tried to make jokes, but no one laughed. We could head back, Evan suggested. Claire shook her head. If it's something human, I don't want it thinking we scare easy. They skirted the ridge, moving lower toward the next basin where a stream cut through patches of snowmelt. The air here was calmer, but Claire kept glancing at the treeless peaks above, half expecting to see the shimmer again. By late afternoon, they'd found another campsite, a narrow bench above the stream, ringed by low alpine pines. It felt safer somehow, the trees a reminder of cover. They boiled water for dinner, the smell of dehydrated chili mingling with the crisp scent of pine sap. The wind died again just after sunset. No footsteps this time. No voices. Just a faint whistling, as though air were being drawn through a hollow bone. It came from uphill, pulsing in slow, uneven bursts. Claire caught Dustin's hand in the dark. Don't answer it, she whispered. They stayed still, listening, until the wind came back. On the third day, they decided to descend, not because anyone said the word scared, but because the air itself felt wrong, charged like the moment before lightning. The trail wound back toward the tree line, switchbacks dropping them into thicker forest. Claire began to relax, until she noticed the stillness again. No birdsong. No wind. A voice floated up from below them on the trail. Her voice. "Dustin, wait for me." Dustin stopped mid-step. "Claire?" He looked over his shoulder at her, only a few feet behind. The voice came again, perfectly pitched, closer. Mara muttered, "We're not alone." They quickened their pace, but the switchbacks meant whatever was mimicking them could cut straight up the slope between. Claire caught flashes of it through the trees, a thin figure, head tilted, arms hanging too long. It followed until the wind returned, scattering the sound into the branches. They made it to the parking lot at dusk, every step downhill like shaking off a weight. The air was moving again, warm gusts carrying the smell of wet earth. They tossed packs into the car without speaking, the relief so sharp it felt almost unreal. Dustin climbed into the driver's seat, cranking the heat. Claire leaned her head back, eyes closing. That was when she noticed it. No sound of the engine. No hum of the heater. Just silence. From the far side of the car came her own voice, "Hey, it's me. Come here." She opened her eyes to see something tall and thin reflected in a passenger window, shimmering in the still air.